What is going on, everybody? We are here for an incredible session about identity and over provisioning. It's something that we've been dealing with for quite a while. I'm Chris Cochran. I'm going to be your host for today's discussion. And I'm joined by identity experts Nick and Gigi, a fan favorite, always with a wealth of knowledge in the world of identity. And we're going to dig into the curse of over provisioning. The session is going to be interactive at the end, so feel free to start dropping your questions as you have them, and we're going to try to get to as many as possible. And to flex that muscle, go ahead and drop into the chat below wherever you are watching this in the world. We're going to be, framing the problem. Why, despite decades of investing in identity and access management tools and processes, why is over provisioning still haunting our organizations? I mean, the short answer is because it's complicated, and we're going to get to all of that. But before we do, I would love for Nick and Gigi to introduce themselves to you with a bit of their background. We'll start with you, Gigi.
Nice to meet everybody. I'm Gigi Shear. I am one of the solution architects here at AKA Identity. I have been in this space for close to a decade. I started out my career, even before tech, in a major US airline, where I learned how critical repeatable processes how critical they are for efficiency and scalability. Started out in IT support and help desk and went through user documentation for onboarding and offboarding. Inadvertently, I became an expert, subject matter expert in what access our users needed. So I then dove in. Our company procured a industry standard IGA tool, which I helped to implement. And then from there, have spent the last several years working in different industry verticals to better understand the complex nature of IAM and some of the many ways that it can be approached.
Fantastic. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, very cool. So yeah, I'm Nick. I'm one of the other solution architects here at AKA Identity. Work right alongside with Gigi every day. Love it. I've also been in the space about 10 years. I think I got my first identity job in April 2015. So coming up on that benchmark. I chose identity because I really recognized it as the lifeblood of an organization. And I would say I've stuck around because I think that still remains true in my heart today. I've worked a variety of technical roles as engineer, architect, in enterprise positions. I've been a technical consultant. So I've kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of identity and access management. And I'm still coming back to fight for the good. So that's my short story.
And then, have you seen more good or ugly?
Oh, that's a great question. I've seen, I could just toot my own horn and say I've seen more ugly turn into good in my career.
I like it. So I'm going to go over just a few quick stats because I think these are pretty striking. Over 70% of companies admit to instances of employees receiving inappropriate access or sensitive data. I mean, that's a lot. That's the majority of organizations that were surveyed in this study. 80% said that that better identity solutions and practices would have prevented some or all of their attacks on their organization. And 99%, just about every organization says security decision makers believe that they will face an identity-related compromise or situation in the next year. So, I mean, why is over-provisioning still an issue, right? We've been investing in these IAM tools for a few decades at this point. New processes, new technologies, new ways of doing things like zero trust, zero standing privileges. Why is over-provisioning still an issue? Let's start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of overarching themes. The first one has been misguided priorities by the business. And this is just like a speed of enablement thing, right? Speed is always the priority. So that's not holistic, especially when you start to bring in security. You're going to try to enable things. So that's one overarching problem. I think a more fundamental problem is also that we refuse to accept kind of the weight of the elements that are people, process, and technology. So most organizations, they get fooled into believing the solution to over provisioning is like 75% technology with the right people and processes to run it. And the reality is that the solution is 75% people and process with the right tools to make them like more effective and efficient. So that paradigm needs to flip up, upside down. Related to, I think there's also just the silver bullet solutions downstream. So like, user behavior analytics and ITDR, like organizations can look at that and say that can solve my identity problems. And they don't say, I need to fix this whole like the foundation and the components that build it up. So.
Mhm. Yeah,
The
I
other
mean,
thing-
and at that point, it's a runaway train because you got to fix that foundation in order to get to healthy, because you're just going to be cleaning up mess after mess if you don't do that. What about you, Gigi?
I think just alongside that is that IAM tools don't necessarily equal effective governance. And so along with that same vein of process is just as, if not more so important to building out a strategy that helps to address over provisioning. So another piece there is the rapid technology adoption. So we've seen this across enterprises, especially within the last 10 years with cloud becoming more and more of a focus and more of these SaaS applications being brought to the table of how quickly things can get out of hand. And
Mhm.
we've seen as well that the approach to IAM sometimes doesn't become a priority until it's a mess, until it
Mhm.
becomes an issue.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about access, I mean, in concept, it seems simple, right? You give people access to the things that they need access to do their jobs, nothing more, nothing less. But in practice, is very different, right? I mean, we've seen organizations where over provisioning is rampant. What defines an effective access model, and why do organizations struggle to implement it at scale? Let's start with you, Gigi.
So some of the things that encompass an effective one, I think, is one that's contextual. So utilizing access policies that are surround a user's function, business function, manager, location, those types of things. One that's data driven, so usage and where that can be brought into play. And one that's least privileged by design. So starting out with good from the get-go.
Mhm.
Another thing from a perspective of struggling is that there's a lot of lack of collaboration between business lines and technical teams that are implementing these products and implementing solutions. So a lot of times where you don't have that collaboration full front and immediately as a priority, that's where you see a lot of communication breakdown, and then that bleeds into technological breakdown and application breakdown from an
Mhm.
effective policy.
Yeah, you can't out technology a bad process. That never works. What about you,
Okay.
Nick?
Yeah, I think that the kind of one of the underlying components there is like the model needs to have like a good flexible why people need access, because that's kind of what it's supposed to be, is like here's why people have the access that they have. So historically, as I mentioned a little bit, we solved that problem for the wrong reason, right? We've given people access models to enable them quickly. So then the pieces that Gigi mentioned there from a security perspective, like least privilege, like they weren't baked into that process. We just made access models. So now everyone's getting too much access, and we're not doing any of the fundamental things to try and address that. And so, in the new state, the new world that we would want to move towards, it would be bringing in, the pieces that she mentioned as well, the data elements, usage. Can we use data in new ways, data analytics, those type of things that can actually assist humans with creating these access models that do scale, and they scale in, again, a holistic way, not just enablement and security, to bring those pieces together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, let's keep going down this track because, Gigi, I know you really focus a lot on programs and processes and governance. How can business leaders and IAM teams build this better collaboration that you're talking about, breaking down these silos, improving these communications so you can have more intelligent, more effective, and more innovative access models?
I think first and foremost, it's shifting from reactive to proactive. So that's first and foremost, I think, a way to get ahead of some of the things that are happening to address this issue of breakdown. So what that can look like is integrating IAM into business processes early on. So if you're bringing on a new application, bringing in your access experts to the table so that they can start to look at and define and showcase and help to inform what an access model might look like from a new tool. From an existing perspective, bringing in your IAM, your business lines, security, operations folks together in a regular stakeholder meeting where you're conducting and talking about appropriateness of actions, but bringing people to the table to talk about issues that exist and how that everyone can tackle them together in a holistic manner is one way in which to go about it. So from a as much as you can get ahead of it as possible, bringing
Yeah.
IAM to the table. The more opportunity that you have for bringing folks together, and bringing access experts to the table, chances are that you'll have more success with your programs.
Yeah, no, I agree. You have to bring folks to the table. If folks aren't involved, you're not going to know their requirements. You're not going to know their concerns, the problems that they're having. So, I mean, I think that connectivity, that connective tissue is super, super important. We were talking about leveraging usage data. So for everyone out there that may be new to identity, what is usage data? And then how do we use that usage data to strengthen governance and access policies?
So usage data surrounds what users are actually utilizing inside of an application, what specific permissions they might be utilizing. How we can leverage that is to better inform our access models is night and day. I mean, in terms of how that helps to inform what an access model might look like. It's not from necessarily a get-go perspective, but from a continuous perspective. The way that access models are approached are sometimes from a project basis of, let's do a point in time rollout of RBAC or rollout of an access model of choice, attribute-based access control, role-based access control, you name it. But those things need to be continuously monitored, continuously governed, continuously reviewed to make sure and ensure the access is appropriate, ensure that that there's not other things at play, new technologies, new access being brought to the table. So having something from a continuous standpoint that also then looks at usage. Is what was put into place at one point in time still appropriate in use tomorrow? 90 days down the road, 6 months, a year, so on and so forth. So usage helps to bring that into play and brings that to the table of going, is this actually appropriate? Is this actually in use?
Right. I mean, that a lot of folks look at it as, some folks, they still adhere to role-based access controls. And that's based on their job roles, their functions. Some folks are basing it on, the team and different groups and things like that. But obviously we have some organizations that are brand spanking new, some of the startups, but then we also have some of these legacy organizations that are really big. And obviously it's really hard to shift and lift and shift these unclear job roles and the spotty HR data that they're dealing with. But how can organizations start to address some of this stuff and help develop these access policies that make more sense?
When you're dealing with spotty HR data, I think that there's other ways in which you could utilize additional attributes. So starting down the ABAC, attribute-based access control route, to see what other attributes you might be able to pivot off of other than just what is coming from an HR perspective. So utilizing identity data analytics platforms to discover and suggest access patterns. So using like peer comparison is one way to go about this. Also then looking at where you might have data inconsistencies. So this is, if you're going to utilize spotty HR data, you need to know where your holes lie. You need to know where the issues exist. So having ways to identify that really is something to help you get ahead, as much ahead of it as you possibly can, to address that downstream before it impacts downstream.
Yeah, 100%. I want to pick on you for a second, Nick. Obviously, we were talking about you can't out technology a bad process, but why isn't technology alone sufficient to solve over provisioning? Right? I think there is this thought that if we just have smart enough technology, if we bring in enough AI into our organization, that we're going to be able to pretty much guardrail a lot of these problems. But why isn't technology sufficient today? And then what critical contexts are the tools of today missing?
Yeah, I think the context that you kind of need to start to right size access models is like, why do I need this access? Like I mentioned earlier. So a tool is going to struggle to do that itself. First of all, it's going to need data aggregated in to be able to build that model of the why. So the first problem with identity has been like, I shouldn't say identity. In organizations, data is not clean, right? And it's not easy to get it clean and get it in a state that the tool can use it. So now we're literally dealing with like potentially bad data to try and establish this thing that we call our why. And examples for traditionally, there's been like population analysis, like, the role mining tools of today are doing that, and they're trying to do it again with data that doesn't really support the tool. Usage, as you guys talked with Gigi, sorry, that's coming it's slow, and I think it's like not going to be at scale for like breadth and depth, right? Like we're going to be able to get usage at a coarse grain level much quicker than fine grain. So we really need that good fine grain usage data, which we've seen in like a cloud entitlement management tool, right? We can actually see exactly what permissions are being used. That's going to be the really the data-driven informer for these tools to understand why I need access because I'm actually using it. So again, historically, we just haven't had that good, that we weren't even using that data at all. And then the tools that exist today, a lot of them don't provide it that well. So we're going to have to work on getting good, compelling whys in tools. And I think data analytics can help support that.
100%. And, I'm sure folks are wondering, like, where is a lot of this information coming from, or where can I get it? You can actually get it from our white paper. It's on the AKI Identity website, but we're going to drop it right here in the chat for anybody to go check it out and see what Nick, Gigi, and team was able to put together about over provisioning. When we think about the governance of identity, what does a good governance tool look like? And what are some of the capabilities of that tool, and what should it enable?
Yeah, so governance is like the closest thing to my heart. I started out as like in just running access reviews was kind of what I did a lot. And I saw the value there. Obviously, that's from a security perspective, what you need. I think the tool needs to be able to answer kind of two questions. Why do you have this access? Or how did you get it? Kind of that same, those two together. And then, is it still appropriate for you to have it? And so to be able to do that, you need to be able to paint it. Sorry, the tool needs to be able to paint just like a much richer picture of access than we have today. So I would want to see, how did someone get access? So was it via access policy or was it a request, right? I want to see, was there justification provided for the access if it's not assigned via policy? I want to see approvals on the request. And I want to see these things on the identity object. Like I can go in my tool and see from my identity, here's an access they have, and here are all these bullet items that tell me how they got it. I want to see approvals. Like I said, I want to see usage data to validate that they're still using the access itself. I want to see identity factors, risk indicators that really could alter, is it appropriate for this person or this account to still have the access? An example would be like, if a domain admin changes job roles, we should probably know about that and maybe get that access removed. And then the last thing is I want to see the tool working continuously, sending insights or alerts so that like the state of my ecosystem isn't stale between my user access reviews. So I think that's kind of some of the things you can build into this tool to start making governance more dynamic, more continuous, and more contextual.
Yeah, I mean, let's double click on that for a second. What is the biggest challenges right now for organizations, technical teams to map usage, or not usage, but map permissions or entitlements to business functions, right? Because, we talk about this join, remove, or leaver. I mean, there's a lot of complications to it, right? So you have folks that are joining, but maybe they don't necessarily need all of the permissions or entitlements that everyone else has. Maybe there's a slight difference to their position, but then they move, and then all of a sudden they might have double the entitlements, double the permissions, just because someone didn't deprovision or disable some of their old accounts. And then, of course, I mean, the worst of them all is when someone actually leaves the organization and there's still things that are turned on, because we all know that could be a pivot point for an attacker or insider threat or anything like that. But what are some of the challenges that organizations are having when it comes to permissions?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that, you just said it, kind of the JML thing is just like, what are your processes in place? Because half of what you just said there could be solved by, do you have a mover process to review their access? Do you have a leaver process that offboards them? So that's one piece is, and this might be shocking to some people, but we have found tons of, cases where those fundamental components aren't in place. So that is an easy win. It's just like, what are your processes to manage the access that people have? And then, do you have anything in place there? From a technical side, when you start getting into like mapping permissions and things, Gigi was talking about collaboration, how that is so important. And it really is, because I think one of the challenges has been to do this correctly, the access mapping from a technical to a business component. It's going to require experts on both sides. Okay. And they're going to speak different languages. Like anyone who's gone from business into IT knows that like it's just not the same language. How you see the world as a business user and like what I'm trying to do and accomplish is not the same thing as what an IT person is trying to enable you to do. And so that's so important. Like the language might not even be the same. It creates more of a problem. It's more difficulty, right? And then I think so we have to bridge that gap first of all. How do people actually communicate with each other? I do think there's tool sets that can even help with this, just in terms of like cutting edge things, like large language models, natural language processing, so we can just start asking questions in a business line user intuitive way, right? Like they can ask questions and they don't have to be super technical, and then the LLM could just crawl information and come back with these relationships, this access mapping, to make it a little bit easier. It doesn't eliminate the human element, but at least it bridges again the gap of how do you take a business person who doesn't understand the technical and allow them to ask questions and get to the mappings that they need.
Yep, spot on. I mean, we're right back to that communication, the breaking down of the silos. I mean, from my perspective, you have policy as code that's really starting to build momentum. Identity control planes, they're looking to improve. They're looking to get better, more efficient, more data driven. But what are some of the opportunities and challenges that you see in the next, few years?
Yeah, there's a ton. I think they both represent a very agreeable future for identity and access management and like technology teams. One of the things that's been resonating a lot with us with our assessments that we've been doing recently is there's a ton of decentralization for lots of reasons. Everyone kind of knows that there's an identity problem of fragmentation, and there is an older adage of like centralize everything. So bring it all under identity's hood and let them do everything. But like that becomes less viable due to like rapid technology changes that we talked about earlier, digital enhancements, because you have new tools that the identity teams can't understand, speed of business, and then like just lean identity teams, right? Like a 7-person identity team can't manage a 5,000 org, all of their application stack and all of the access management in those tools. So there needs to be, ways to enable the business lines to ingest or interface with identity services that doesn't require the identity team to be the provider and the implementer. And that's where the policy as code, starts offering that flexible framework where we can, sort of instantiate identities wishes without so much identity involvement, right? Yeah. So it's a cool enablement perspective that allows that to happen around the org. The identity control plane concept, I actually only heard of that recently, and I loved it. It's bridging the gap of like the fragmentation that we have, right? Like now we've got this single place you can pull things together. And because right now I think orgs are just cobbling it, and they literally have like broken, here's where I go for this, here's where I go for this, and we want to bring it together into a single place. So I do think that there's some challenges here, like there's the technical acumen is going to continue to rise, right? We're talking about concepts here that are technically complicated. So policy as code requires a team that can understand how to deploy that, how to deploy the code itself. And I think tools can start making that easier if they make it drag and drop, or let's point and click type policies. But that's going to be a continued problem always. And I think then the other one that's really important is like identity has to achieve good governance. To do that, we have to understand how things are truly being done. So we really need to explore new data sets that allow identity the visibility over something like the policy as code, or how access is being granted in the system without identity going into the system, right? I want my identity plane to grab that, like get the configuration out and show me what they're doing over there. So the identity engineer doesn't need access to that system, doesn't have to go in there and crawl it and figure it out. So those things are still, they're on the horizon. We still have to work on them, but there's opportunity for that to happen again. And I think we are moving in the right direction as an industry to try and, going back to a visibility concept instead of just like pull everything under one team.
Right. Yeah. And the first time I heard of identity control plane was actually from Ian Glazer. And it does make so much sense. And I think that the way that identity is going today, the concept of identity control plane is only going to get more important when you're thinking about things like security, you're thinking about efficiency, and you're thinking about some of this new governance stuff that they're kind of standing up today. Things like zero standing privileges, AI powered reviews. You were talking about access reviews a little bit earlier, which I have struggled through in my day. But where do you see things like this going? Where do they succeed? Where do they fail? Where are we at today? And where are you hoping we go in the future?
I think they have, like those two examples specifically, they have tremendous potential in our space for like the meta point of we want to end static role-based identity and access management, right? We want something more dynamic and continuous. So with ZSP, you're getting like an incredibly dynamic concept because it's literally ephemeral access, right? Like the account could just go away because that's what we can configure. So that's pretty great. It's, again, dynamic security as well. AI-powered reviews offer the potential for continuous monitoring with logic as well. So that's pretty much as dynamic as they can get. You know, they can derive insights live or even like during a campaign that can enable reviewers to just be more thorough. And then the campaign's not just rubber stamping or, you know, I'm exhausted with this. So the dynamic component to these things is where I think that they're super valuable, and it doesn't really matter specifically what they're doing. What we need to move towards is, again, dynamic continuous state. I do think that the challenges or potential failures. So, you know, like if we go back to what I said a long time ago in this conversation about 75-25, if people try and make these, again, the technology is not 75% of this, it's the 25%. So like ZSP policies aren't going to create themselves. We have to have a human element there. AI power policies are only going to be so good. So we just need to always remember how we supplement what we're doing as humans and our processes with the tools. And the big thing to bring into that is that all of these, like AI models especially, they have to understand what's important to you, right? So we really have to understand, identify, and define our priorities, right? And this is something orgs that have gone into like program maturation, they find that right away, because you immediately ask like, well, what am I supposed to do? Everything needs to be done. You have to define your priorities, and so you start small, and that's something we always talk about. But you know, when you've got a technology coming out, they're going to start small too. So they might only cover 40-60% of the things that you do in your environment. They can only cover that. What are you doing with that other percentage? So I think having those things in your head, making sure you have the priorities that matter to you, those are things that humans are always going to have to identify. And these tools have to be the 25% supplemental, regardless of how good they are.
I got just a couple more questions for both of you. So everybody that's watching this, if there's anything that stood out to you, any questions that you might have for these two experts in identity, please be sure to drop them, especially on the LinkedIn. We'll try to get to everybody's question. Let's start with you on this one, Gigi. How do you feel data analytics is going to reshape governance in the next 3 to 5 years? And what role should platforms like the AKA Identity Platform or other platforms that are being developed out there play in this evolution?
I think that it's going to be pivotal. I think that usage is going to be pivotal. Now, Nick had mentioned that today, there's a limit to what we're able to see and what's available for us to utilize and to take action on today. But I think that it's going to be pivotal in 3 to 5 years as we hopefully see a trend of applications deploying more of the opportunities and reporting capabilities for usage of entitlements to be queried. It's going to allow for better access models to be created. And that's really going to help us to move away from this place of educated assumptions, educated guesses of what people need access to by showing what people are actually using. So I do see this as being realistically the next step forward. The industry, though, does not have a great framework to support this today. In 3 to 5 years, I'd love to see it continuously built out.
Yeah. What about you, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have two things that are sort of like could be current state, and then one that's going to be a little bit of a paradigm shift. But there's bad data that we talked about already, and everyone knows this. Any identity person knows there is bad data. So you can clean it up with data analytics. We can start doing some cool things to actually understand where our data problems are. So there's that one is huge. And then there's just, Gigi mentioned this earlier, in terms of if you've got bad HR data or poorly defined, there's population analysis that can create unique groups based on their likeness. So those two use cases are like right there. Just get data analytics on top of this and it will start working on it. The other one that I think is going to be more future-based is breaking out the traditional IAM data models, which are like, your identity, their accounts, the access, and start considering like how new data sets can fit into identity fabric, right? And make it rich and contextual. So, behavioral context is one we see today. They're starting to get in like device location, access patterns, things like that. But imagine using application configurations, logging tools, API gateways, policy as code that we mentioned. Like you can put all that stuff on top of an identity, and now we can start seeing how could that identity behave, and then that matters. Now we're more proactive as well. So I think that those different data sources coming in and becoming part of the identity data model will help us create a better state that's way, way, way more flexible than it is today.
Yeah. You know, one of my favorite questions that you could ask in any process, any interview is like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change? Because I mean, I think it causes you to kind of focus on what the biggest pain point is. I mean, because if you ask that about anything, if you're saying like, hey, if you could change everything, you could list a million different things. But if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing that would have the biggest impact on enterprise identity management, what would it be? Start with you, Gigi.
For, back to, I think, my response to the previous is more applications implementing usage data to be queried. So I think that would help tremendously, not in terms of just even building access models, but let's go back and talk about access reviews and how those could be more informed by folks that are performing and completing those access reviews. If people know what's actually in use, it gives them more information to go off of to say whether or not someone continues to need access to whatever is being reviewed. So that's a huge piece, and one that I think that I would love to see more applications holistically make this information available in their platforms so that enterprises can be more efficient and more effective for how they're developing and creating and refining their access policies.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Nick?
Yeah, I'm gonna say there's the people part where we flip the paradigm upside down and we start understanding that, again, all of this is 75% people in process and less technology to understand. Then we can start using the technology wisely. So that would be the biggest wand wave I would give. An easier one if people want it, and this isn't probably, it seems like sort of cliche because it's a trend today, but it's data science. Put data science on top of it and we'll be able to start doing some things without even talking about that previous point. Like, you can stay technology focused if you want, if we can start using data more intelligently and we can start engineering it in ways that data engineers have been doing forever. We just haven't been doing it in identity.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well said. With that, let's get to some of these questions. Inquiring minds want to know. Looks like this question is for Nick. Nick, you mentioned seeing organizations go from ugly to good. Do you have an example of how you've been able to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It always starts with like understanding current state and then desired next state, right? So that's been the gap in projects that I've seen fall apart or not go as well. They never got that clear definition. So when we are even doing assessments today, Gigi and I, we're really looking at like, how well defined are things in your org? And we get people looking at us funny sometimes, like, why are you asking me this question? And I'm asking you because if you don't have that good definition about where you are and where you want to go, there is nothing you can do to get there, because you, like, right, just what I said, how could you possibly do it? So it's that was where it always started. And in a technical implementation, a lot of times that's really good requirements, which is exhausting because it takes a long time to get them put together. It takes a lot of collaboration. There's no time to value in many cases. Like, many orgs don't appreciate what that actually entails. But it's a necessity. So again, the good projects that I've put together, the good programs that we've built, they've always had a good understanding of where they are, where they want to go, and then building the requirements in the middle so we can actually map what we're doing and what we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Do you have an answer that you would like to add, Gigi?
I think, just alongside that, having that roadmap, if you know where you are and you know where you want to go and you have the requirements, that then informs you to better create that roadmap in order to get there. We all know Rome wasn't built in a day, but that's the way to approach building and continuously building an IAM program at an enterprise, is to have a roadmap. You can't boil the ocean. You can't just go out and do everything overnight. You can't do everything in 1 year even. So being able to have something that you can phase in and work in phases allows for you to have a potential for a much more successful program at your enterprise.
Yeah, perfect. This is a good one, probably for both of you. I lead a small team in the IAM organization, and I'm largely reactive. How do I get to proactive when we fight fires every day?
Such a golden question. That's such a golden question. I think, what I would say is, where is your biggest fire? That might be a place to start. It's going, what is giving you the most grief? What is giving you the most issue today? And start finding, thinking and brainstorming of ways in which to address that first. You could go with that strategy. You could go with the other strategy of just trying to document out and figure out where all the fires are holistically so that you can have a better understanding and pulling them together of like, what are the themes that are happening to better attack it that way. There's a couple different directions that you can go, but first understanding what fires you're fighting, what is causing as much reactivity from that you're dealing with will help you then to see what are ways that you can then get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to piggyback off of that. Get an assessment done. So, because it is Gigi's spot on in terms of like, we need to understand what we're dealing with. And that's part of the problem. Like, you don't even have the time to do that often. So, and I would even say on top of that, the getting assessment thing is like, you need someone to come in and look at your environment, because we're just so good at justifying why we do things and how we do things. You need someone to come in and ask you hard questions, and questions that frankly sometimes sound stupid, because like, why you, again, people have looked at me all the time and said, why do you ask that? But like, later on, they start to get it. Okay, I understand why you're asking it now, because if we don't know, if we can't answer that question, we've got a fundamental problem. So I think it is exactly what Gigi said. You need to start to understand the environment and what you're dealing with so that you can start putting some, some fences around those things. That, in my mind, starts with an assessment, especially if you've got a state where you're constantly reactive, because your whole identity program right now, who knows where we should be working at maturing it. And an assessment will allow you to like go into each of the, the domains and actually figure out workable, actionable things you can start doing in each one.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if anybody knew this, but Nick and Gigi, they do the assessment. So if you're looking to get something like that done, be sure to reach out to them. And I'm sure CV's probably watching this. So if he drops a comment down in the chat, he'll be able to get you hooked up as well. And I think this is a perfect question to end on. Obviously, I know that there is data everywhere in my organization. How do I systematically and technologically find the data, get access to the data, and bring the data in a place where I can ask the questions I need the answers to?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I guess I'll just go first because I'm already talking. We've actually seen some very interesting use cases of the data lake concept, and I think that's what we all need to start going towards. And whether it's a targeted identity data lake, right, like where only identity data is going to come in, I think that makes the most sense because there are security concerns about it anyway. But that's the start. To reiterate the same point we've made over and over again, define it first. Where are my data sources that I need to bring in? The identity data model today, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's not super complex in terms of what it is. It's identities, their access, or their accounts, the access that they have, and maybe the attributes on those things. But like, you don't have to supplement it with these new things that I was talking about earlier. You just bring in that information to a place that you can go in and start querying it. So really, it's centralize all the data somewhere so that you can start building out the next step of what that looks like. How do we then analyze the data? How do we visualize the data? Those things. But if you don't get it somewhere, you're back to having this fragmented solution where you're pulling it from 16 different places, or you're really trying to, you're going to 16 different places to paint the picture. And if you just put it into, a lake or something along those lines, at least we can go one place for our palette, right? So.
And where do you start? That's the other piece of that, is like, where do you start with the data in your environment? So talking about what Nick had said about defining that. Well, what are your crown jewels? What is the data? What is the data? What are the systems? What are the applications that you're most interested in, that are most valuable to you, that mean the most for whatever you're trying to accomplish? Now, this could be from like a regulatory perspective, where you want to get data from your SOX applications all together in one place. That's a place to start, and you might have, say, 50 of those applications versus the 300 that you have in your stack or more. So finding a place to whittle down of what it is that you're trying to accomplish first, and then going back to having a roadmap of what you're looking to bring in and phasing it, that's going to help you to be successful in that endeavor.
100%. Nick, Gigi, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedules to hop on and talk about over provisioning. For everyone out there, you're looking to get access to the white paper. We are going to drop that link one more time into the chat for folks to get access to that. Also, we're going to drop another link. We're going to be at the RSA conference, and we want to meet with everybody out there. So find one of the events that you'd be interested in, and we'd love to hang out with you and talk all things identity. Thanks for everybody that is out there watching and using your very valuable time to hang out with us and speak about all the things identity. And with that, we will see everyone next time.